नमो नमः प्रियमित्राणि सर्वं कुशलम् इति कामये। गतसप्ताहे वयं सन्धीनां रूपाणि दृष्टवन्तः। तेन अहम् आशां करोमि यत् इदानीं यदा कमपि ग्रन्थं पठन्ति अथवा श्लोकं पठन्ति तत्र विद्यमानसन्धीनाम् इतोपि स्पष्टतरः बोधः जातः अस्ति। तेन बोधेन इदानीं श्लोकस्य सहजतरम् अर्थावगमनं कर्तुं शक्नुवन्ति इति। तेन अर्थस्य अपि बोधः वरतरः अस्ति इति अहं विश्वासं करोमि। तर्हि नमस्ते dear friends, and I sincerely hope that all is well at your end. I hope also that the lessons that we looked at last time on the sandhis have facilitated your comprehension of texts as you read them, because there are also the sandhi vichedas that you should be able to do now. You should be a little more confident about it, and therefore I am sincerely hoping that you're feeling happier about being able to access original texts. So let's move on for today's session. Adya vayam drakshyaamah module 5, which was dealing with a revision of the dhatu rupani and an introduction to the karma vachyam. And this lecture, which is lecture 13, is an understanding of the 10 ganas, and we are going to be looking at part 1 in this lecture because it's a big portion on the whole. The concepts that will be covered in this lecture are: we look at a revision of the building blocks of a sentence, give you some general information on dhatus, and then I'll introduce you to all the 10 ganas with their characteristics, and we are going to do some practice conjugating them in the Vartamana Kala or the Lat Lakara and the Bhavishya Kala or the Lit Lakara. And because this is part 1, we are going to be looking at the first until the 5th groups or the ganahas. And then we'll do a conversation for building our vocabulary and trying to apply the points that we've learned. Moving on, we'll do the verses that are defining Guru Shushruksha, which is the next quality that is spoken of in the verse on Dharma. And to close, we'll have a quote by Swami Vivekananda on Guru Shushruksha. So let's look at the building blocks of a Sanskrit sentence. As you can see, we had talked of the Sanskrit sentence having a basic formation of a noun and a verb, and we've spent enough time on the table which is looking at all the nouns. So we've looked at in detail the noun forms, we've looked at the cases, etc., etc. The big chunk that remains to be studied is this other part of it on the verb side, and the important thing to remember in that context was that the dhatus had two essential aspects, which was that there is a phalam. So every verb has a fruit and there is a process in that. That's the vyapara. And this is something that I've found is phenomenal. This is literally a lens to look at any action in the world. You look at any action and you say, what is the fruit of this action? Once you determine the fruit, you can work backwards and determine what will be the process. So it opens up tremendous original ways and different alternative ways at looking at reality. The topic today, more specifically a grammatic one, is going to be a focus on the 10 ganas, the 10 kinds of verbs that we will be encountering. And the rest of it is something that we will look on as we go down with the other lectures. So this is a more specific example with balakaha gacchati. So gacchati belongs to the comes from the root gam, and which belongs to the bhuadi gana, for example, which is the first gana. But we'll understand this a little better as we move on. Here are some simple facts about the Sanskrit dhatu. First and foremost, there are about 2000 roots enumerated by ancient grammarians. Less than half are used, so around 800. And aham chintayami tasya ekam api karanam bhavati yat karanam sanskritam tatha bhashita bhasha nasti idanim. अतः यत् प्रयोगे आसीत् पूर्वम् अथ पुनश्च संस्कृतभाषायां तथा लेखस्य पूर्वं यथा शास्त्राणाम् अध्ययनं शास्त्राणां लेखनं भवति स्म इदानीं तथा नास्ति इति कारणात् अहं चिन्तयामि व्यवहारे केवलम् 800 धातूनां परिचयः मिलति Okay, so in practice we see about 800 because I think it could come because of the paucity of the use of the language either in the oral format or in the written format, and that could possibly be one of the reasons for the lack of use of the rest of the vocabulary of verbs. A typical verb is consisting of these aspects. So there is the root or the dhatuhu, then there is the suffix or the vikarana pratyaya, which is unique to every group of verb, and then you have the ending, which is the tingantaha, which will tell you about the number, the person, as well as the tense or the mood, and this will give you the final verb form. Now verbs can have several meanings. They are nanarthakaha, dhatavaha, and the ganas can change accordingly. So the same verb, and we have a few examples. When it belongs to one particular group will have a particular meaning. When it belongs to another group, it can have another meaning. Another important characteristic of the verb is that it can be conjugated either in the parasmaipadi, where the action or the fruit of the verb is directed towards somebody else, or in the atmanepadi, where the fruit is enjoyed by the doer of the action, or it can be in both. And sometimes whether it is directed outward or inward can also affect the meaning of the word. तर्हि गणानां परिचयस्य कृते एकः श्लोकः उत एका कारिका अस्ति. भ्वाद्यदादिजुहोत्यादिर्दिवादिस्वादिरेव च तुदादिश्च रुधादिश्च तन्नक्र्यादिचुरादयः. Astu. So let's break it up and see what the 10 names are of the different groups associated with the different verbs. So bhuadi ganaha, prathama ganaha, dvitiya ganaha, adadi ganaha, tritiya ganaha, juhotyadi ganaha, which is also known as hwadi ganaha, because the root verb is who. And then chaturtha ganaha asti divadi ganaha, punaha panchama ganaha asti swadi ganaha, tadanantaram tudadi ganaha asti shashthaha, anantaram rudhadi ganaha asti saptamaha, ashtamaha tanadi ganaha, navama ganaha asti karyadi ganaha, dashama ganascha churadi ganaha asti. Tari pashyama bhwadi gane kim kim asti tatra. It's an introduction to the conjugation of the verb bhu, and we are going to be looking at in the parasmaipadi, in the vartamana kala or the lat lakara, and the bhavishya kala or the lit lakara. Tari bhu sattayam. So this is typically how you would find it in Panini's Ashtadhyayi, where you have the root form, you are given the meaning of it, and what I have added here is the shap vikarana pratyaya is that special feature that is added to the verb bhu, and which is added to all the verbs in the category of bhu in order to arrive at the final form of the verb. So what I'd like you to understand is that yada vayam dhatunam vyavaharam kurmah samanyataya sambhashane vayam tatra vicharamava na kurmah yat tatra bhu dhatu arabhya bhavati paryantam vartamane kale katham bhavati iti vayam adhika prashnan tatra na pritchamaha. Vartamana kale asti ti taha anti etavadavya eva vayam janimaha. So normally when we are using the language as in the spoken manner, we hardly ever think, or in fact we never think of how did the root bhu become bhavati. There must be a process, or is it random chance? One feature of Sanskrit is that there is nothing like random chance, or you might have already appreciated the extent to which there is a detailed thinking and analysis involved in at every step of this language. Astu? So when we go from bhu to bhavati in application, all we need to know that which is the tense. So vartamana kalaha, who is the person, third person, prathama purushaha, which is the number, singular or ekavachanam. Therefore the formula that we know is ti taha anti si taha ta ami ava ama if it is in the parasmaipadi. Astu? But when you go to Panini's Vyakaranam, we find all these sutras. There is a detailed processing underlying the steps that lead from bhu, the root verb, to the final stage of bhavati. And what are they? You see all this bhu, there's lah karmani cha bhave cha karma kebhyaha, and then you have the lat that gets added because it's the vartamana kale, so vartamane lat. And then you see there are different kinds of rules that are making very minute perceptible and imperceptible changes. But what is important to know is that most of the verbs will have similar forms until somewhere here, or until kartari shap. Until there you have more or less the same forms, and then you get the diversification depending on the class of verb that you are talking of. Astu, tari shap is a feature of the bhu dhatu. I'll just take you down one case so that you understand how this happens. So bhu shap plus tip is ting shit sarvadhatukam, and there you have it stays bhu shap tip, and then you've got lashakva tadhite. And what happens? The sh drops, as you can see. So it becomes bhu up tip. Tasya lopaha. So the sh has disappeared. Next word, bhu up tip halantyam. So what happens? It says hal antyam. So the pakara, which is a hal here, which is a consonant, will then get a lopaha. Tasya lopaha. So that disappears in this particular sutra here. And then you've got the next sarvadhatu kardha dhatuka yoho. With that particular rule, there is also an augmentation of the bhu into bho, because that is a feature of the first group verbs, that the vowel gets a guna, or it gets the next level of sound. So u becomes o, e becomes a, r becomes ar, etc. Astu tatra guna and vriddhi is when it increases even more. So the vriddhi of u will be au, for example. E will be I, rikara, it will become R. So these are some technical terminologies that are helpful to know, but not anivaryam. If you're keen on grammar, then these would become interesting for you to learn. So we've got bhav. So bho plus a, you remember by this rule, echo yava yavaha, it becomes bhav plus a plus ti, ataha bhavati. So to go from bhu to bhavati, there are approximately 22 odd sutras to allow this transformation to take place. Astu, tari agre pashyama. प्रयोगे एतदस्माकं कार्यमस्ति. प्रयोगः कथं भवति? तर्हि अत्र अस्ति भवति, भवतः, भवन्ति. So please say it along with me because you're already very familiar with these forms. तर्हि मिलित्वा एव वदामः. भवसि, भवतः, भवथ, भवामि, भवावः, भवामः. उत्तमम्. And वयम् एतदपि जानीमः यत् तत्र लट् लकार भविष्यकालस्य लृट् लकारयोः च तत्र बहु साम्यं वर्तते. So there's a lot of similarity except for the ishya of the bhavishya that is introduced there. So it just, that's the only practical change that happens in application. Tari kim bhavati? Bhavishyati, bhavishyatah, bhavishyanti, bhavishyasi, bhavishyatah, bhavishyatha, bhavishyami, bhavishyavah and bhavishyamah. Uttamam. Anye kechana tatra dhatavah santi yatha char. Kim bhavati? Charati, charishyati. Uttamam. Pat. Patati, pathishyati. Uttamam. At, atati, atishyati. Jeev, jivati, jivishyati. Uttamam. So, atra we've tried to bring for you almost 100 verbs. You'll be introduced to that. But yad mukhyam asti etadaham vaktum ichhami, that when you're doing this, please say it aloud. Say both the root form and the final form aloud. Kimartham vadami nama. It's extremely helpful in Sanskrit to start becoming familiar with the root forms of verbs. Because if you can start getting a feel on how to arrive at the root forms, you will then be able to recognize root verbs across various manifestations of that verb by using of upasargas, by the change of suffixes, in different verb formats, in noun forms. So the familiarity with the root forms will give you access to a much vaster vocabulary. And secondly, the root forms, as we were looking at earlier on also, have a certain inherent meaning in them. So if you can sort of become sensitive to those root meanings by the very sound effect of the words, it will allow you a very different kind of a feel with the language. Astu, tari tathapi prayatnam kartum shaknuvanti. Tari atra asti bhu bhavati vad vadati ji jayati smris smarati such shochati gam gachati drish pashyati. Atra there is we don't know if there's a verb that's gone missing, you know, at some place, because drish becomes pashyati. So there must be a few more sutras that are allowing that transformation to take place. Similarly, stha becomes tishtati, save becomes sevate, and yaj becomes yajati, or it's an ubhayapadi, so both. So yajati or yajati, in this case we see that the term, the meaning of sacrifice, offering, does not really change there. Tari abhyasam kurvantu, and because you have the bhavishya also, just see for the fun of it if you can think of how the bhavishya would unfold. And I must mention that there is an excellent website. There are two in fact. One is Sansadhani, which is there, you can look at. The other one is ashtadhyayi.com also, where you can find all the verb forms. You just put in the root and it gives you a lot of details, including understanding which are the sutras that have led up to the formation of this particular verb form. So if you're curious to understand the hardware, Kripaya Tatra Pashyantu, both these websites have been mentioned in the reference section. Agrima dhatu pashyama, tari atra asti adadi ganaha, dvitiya ganaha asti, or the second group. Atra you'll be introduced to the conjugations of two verbs, ad to eat, which is the name after which the group is called, and as to be, because that's one of the essential primary verbs that are important, that's an important one for us. And dvayamapi parasmaipadyam asti, and vartamana kale punah bhavishya kale asti. So let's look at an example of the adadi ganaha. You've got ada bhakshane and vikarana pratyayasya abhavaha. So there is no vikarana pratyayaha here. Okay, so what does this ada mean? It's very interesting. This anuswara there has a particular function, and what is that function? So you have this sutra of Panini which says upadeshe janunasikaha it. Okay, so I'll do the sandhi vichheda, join me. It says upadeshe uttamam ach anunasikaha it. So it is saying that there is a potential of an it, which means a disappearance of what? Of the upadesha, which is an ach and an anunasika. So it is a swara, whichever vowel, the ach vowel and a nasalized one, will be attributed the potentiality of disappearance, and the next sutra, which is tasya lopaha, will show you how that vowel is eliminated. Okay, so you see how ada becomes ad. So ad adi becomes adadi ganaha. So here sometimes you will find it as ada or ad bhakshane iti rupam bhavati. I just want to mention that there is this website called ashtadhyayi.com or Sansadhani, but on ashtadhyayi.com in particular, you will get all these sutras. In fact, that's where I have got it from. So if you're interested in understanding the hardware of these transformations by the use of Panini sutras, please consult that website here. So what we see here is that all of this is the same as you go down, and you have ad plus tip, and that's where the conjugation of the present tense comes in, because it's tip which is there, and it is saying adi prabhritibhyaha shapaha, and it's saying after that ad plus tip halantyam. So it is telling you that the pa is a hal antya, it's then ending with a pa there, and the next sutra which says tasya lopaha means drop that one. So ad plus ti, and kharicha is the sutra of Vyanjana Sandhi, which makes it atti. Okay, so that's the final form, which means to eat. Astu abhyasam kurma militva kurma. Tari atti attaha adanti uttamam atsi attaha attha admi advaha and admaha. I'll give you an example and let me see if you can do it for me. So we eat our food at 12 o'clock. Alright, so do this for me. So we eat, khadami is the khadamaha is the usual one that we know, but in this case it is admaha, and that's an opportunity for you to use a new verb form. So admaha, kim admaha, food, bhojanam admaha, kasya bhojanam admaha, our food, ataha asmakam bhojanam admaha, kada admaha, at 12 o'clock, dwadasha vadane. Tari purnam vakyam vadantu, dwadasha vadane asmakam bhojanam admaha. And karta kaha asti, if you want to include it, vayam. Purna vakyam militva vadama, vayam dwadasha vadane asmakam bhojanam admaha. Uttamam. Spashtam asti, etasya prayogaha katham bhavati iti. Astu. Agre bhavishyakale kim asti tatra atsyati, atsyataha, atsyanti, atsyasi, atsyatthaha, atsyattha, atsyami, atsyavaha, atsyamaha. Samana vakyam idanim purvam yat kritam asti bhavishyakale kurvantu. Tari vayam asmakam bhojanam dwadasha vadane atsyamaha. Make it into ekavachanam, uttama purusha. Aham mama bhojanam dwadasha vadane atsyami. In the vartamana kale, aham mama bhojanam dwadasha vadane admi. Astu. So you see how you can practice all of that. So when you have these slides, just pause, try and make an independent sentence, because if you do that little effort of making an independent sentence, it's only then that these words are going to become part of your system. They're going to be part of your vocabulary. Ataha yada etat pashyanti, please press the pause button. At least ekam vakyam vakyadvayam va etadrisha conversions kurvantu. वर्तमाने कुर्वन्तु, एकवचने कुर्वन्तु, तस्य बहुवचनं कुर्वन्तु, पुनः भविष्यकाले कुर्वन्तु, रिटर्न गच्छन्तु. So play around, take one simple sentence. Don't make such complicated sentences if you want. बहु सहजम, at least a 3-worded sentence. कर्ता भवतु, तत्र धातु भवतु, पुनः एक यत् किमपि मध्ये एक कर्म वा किमपि भवतु नाम. तत् कृत्वा वाक्यं रचयितुम् अभ्यासं कुर्वन्तु. तदानीम् एतादृश टेबल्स् तस्य पूर्ण उपयोगः भविष्यति. अस्तु, तर्हि अत्र अन्ये धातवः सन्ति. के सन्ति? अत्, अत्ति, अत्स्यति, स्वप्, स्वप्पिति, स्वप्स्यति, भा, भाति, भास्यति, या, याति, यास्यति. In the bhuadi dhatu you had gum. Astu, atra tatra ya iti dhatu asti to mean the same thing, to go. But kripaya, when you have this slide, you can again put a pause button and see if you are able to use all these sentences in the Vartamana Kala and the Bhavishya Kala. Anantaram, you can go to either Sansadhani or ashtadhyayi.com to make sure that you've got it correct. These are quite comprehensive lists of verb conjugations. Astu, agre gachhama. So, we'll look at the as dhatu because that's another very important one. You see how as becomes asti. Atra militva vadama, asti staha santi, asi staha stha, asmi swaha smaha. Bhavishyakale, bhavishyati, bhavishyataha, bhavishyanti, bhavishyasi, bhavishyathaha, bhavishyatha, bhavishyami, bhavishyavaha and bhavishyamaha. Astu, tarhi, how would you say you two are here on time? Okay, so you two will be Yuvam are here atra sthaha on time. Samaye. Tari Yuvam samaye atra sthaha. Tend to put the verb at the end. Sahajam api bhavati. Now I'd like you to try and do the bhavishya of that. Can you do that for me? Dvivachane eva bhavishya kale kurvantu. Uttamam. So you two will be here on time. Kim bhavishyati? Yuvam atra samaye bhavishyathaha. Uttamam. Astu, agre pashyama. So we've got the same set of verbs here. And again, Piyushasya sahayana itopi dhatavaha atra vartante. So ad, ya, rud. So ad, atti, ya, yati, rud, roditi, roditi. So to be very careful, it will rud, but there is this guna, it becomes roditi, jagr, jagarti. So that's why don't just do passive looking at these tables. Avashyam tatra uchchai uktva likhantu. So say it aloud, please. That is what is very important. Jagarti, I, eti, anantaram as, asti, han, hanti, vid, veti or veda. Can be both. She becomes shete, atmanepadi rupa asti, as, aste, stays iti. So let's move on to the third group. Tritiya ganaha kaha asti? Juhotyadi ganaha athava huadi ganaha. We'll introduce you to two verb forms. So hu to offer and da to give. And this is in the Parasmaipadi or in the Vartamana Kalaha and the Bhavishya Kalaha. Tari atra hu dhatoho kim bhavati rupam. So you see how hu. Now atra vikarana hu dhatoho arthaha prathamataya asti dana danayoho adane. So in this process of giving and getting, okay, so dana adanayoho, it is the process of offering, okay. And you have vikarana pratyayasya abhavaha. So there is no particular vikara pratyaya, but you have this other kind of a word here which is shluhu, which ends up doubling the root, okay. So at this particular stage you say hu plus tip, and then you've got juhotyadibhyaha shluhu. So this kind of a sutra which tells you exactly the sutra that is specific to that group. It says shluhu. What is the shlu doing? In shlau, you do a doubling of the root verb. So it becomes hu and hu plus tip. And then haladihi shesha, which then with kuho chuhu makes it juhu tip. And then we know halantyam, so you'll also start recognizing it. Halantyam and then tasya lopaha, so the p goes, so it is juhu ti, and then sarvadhatuka ardhadhatuka yohu will make it into an okara there, so juho ti ubhe abhyastam. Okay, and that is how you get juhoti iti rupam bhavati. धातोः अभ्यासं कुर्मः मिलित्वा. जुहोति जुहुतः जुह्वति जुहोषि जुहुथः जुहुथा जुहोमि जुहुवः and जुहुमः. Astu, you just should try saying it, because you see that all these pronunciations have quite an effect on the system of the person. Juhu, you just say that and adbhuta anubhava bhavati. Astu, the next one is even more fantastic in the bhavishya kala. Tari maya saha avashyam vadatu. तर्हि अत्र अस्ति होष्यति होष्यतः होष्यन्ति होष्यसि होष्यथः होष्यथ होष्यामि होष्यावः and होष्यामः. Let's do this exercise. Tomorrow they will sacrifice at 6, or they will offer at 6. Either of them, sacrifice or offer. So they will sacrifice or they will offer will be होष्यन्ति. kada shvaha Samayah Shadvadane. Tari Shvaha Shadvadane. You can either say te or not, but Hoshyanti iti bhavati. Astu spashtam asti? Chalatu. Let's look at some other verbs here. So dha becomes dadhati. There's a doubling, but with a the and a dha. Dhasyati. And you see this doubling is in the Vartamana Kala primarily. And later on there might be others, but the ones that we will encounter is in the Vartamana Kala atra. Then ha becomes jahati, to kill. Hu, juhoti, as we've seen. Bhi, to be afraid, becomes bibheti. Astu. Moving on. The other verb that we talked of is dudai dane. Vikarna pratyasya abhava, but shlu doubles the root. So, dudai, can you guess what the form of that verb is? Uttamam, you said it. It is the da. And you see, here there are all these rules. Dudai is the verb form there, and with all these rules, it is only after these sutras that you come to da. Okay. And then the specific one here is when you have da plus tip with the shlu, which makes it the double da, da, tip. And then you see the da, da, tip, the da has to become a the, which makes it's coming from this root raswaha. Okay. And then you have to move on and it becomes the dati. But I will also put a caveat in here in a sense that etad avashyakam sambhashanartham etad sarva gabhira jnanasya prayojanam na bhavati. Yadi jananti avashyam labhaya bhavati and janantu ityapi aham agraham karomi. Kintu sambhashanartham etad sarvam jnatva sambhashanam karomi iti chintayanti chet tad avashyakam nasti. So it's not that in order to speak you need to know any of these rules. If you know them, the better, because your confidence with the language will be much more. Astu. Tari agre pashyama. Militva vadama. Dadati dattaha dadati. Mind you, it's not dadanti, but dadati. Dadasi dattaha dattha. Dadami dadvaha dadmaha. Bhavishyakale dasyati dasyataha dasyanti. Dasyasi dasyathaha dasyatha. Dasyami dasyavaha and dasyamaha. Astu spashta. So atra dhatavaha samanaha eva santi. But what I'd like you to notice is that the ending of the verbs is not always the same. So you've got hu, which makes it juhoti, it makes it jahati, but you've also got bhi, ikaranta verbs. So you just think of how phenomenal Panini's mind must have been to be able to classify these various applications under a similar category of verbs, because he was then able to apply, let's say in this context, the shluhu pratyay that will make that difference of the doubling. But it's actually a humongous intellectual feat to have written the Ashtadhyayi. Astu, tari agre pashyama. Some more verbs, and please say them with me. Hu, juhoti, hri, jihreti, bhi, bibheti, ha, jahati, and then da, dadati or datte, rupa dvayamasi, da, dha, dadhati or holds, bhr, bibharti, bibhrite, nijir. So ninekti, nenikte. So you see, it's not so evident. Jnanam avashyakam asti. Prr, piparti, which fulfills ma, and this is the root of the word to measure. Ma, maya. What is maya? Maya is not just one. It's not just an illusion. It has associative senses of illusion, and which is the biggest illusion that we are all living under. We are all living under the biggest illusion to believe, first and foremost, that everything that is there, these differentiated realities, are absolute in themselves. Okay, so what Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta specifically says is that these differences are not the absolute reality of anything on earth. These differential realities are Vyavaharika Satta. So they are there in the practical world, but in their essential form, it is nothing but one enormous or one incredible energy form. And if you can sometimes do this exercise of wearing a lens, imagine that you were suddenly made to wear a lens of a quantum world where everything is vibrations, and then you look around and you will see that the Ma is a certain force of consciousness that measures out, that is allowing each difference to be maintained and such. And this is what Sri Aurobindo really says. Ataha, just one simple word, Ma. Another one I will tell you because it's so fascinating. Tatra asti, you have the word Sammanam. Okay, Sammanam. Sammanam means the measurement from all sides. Of whom? Of yourself. So what is your self measurement? What is that measure beyond which or below which you will never descend? So the word Sammana really is a huge uplifter of consciousness, because it is for each individual to decide what is that standard below which you will not go, and what is the highest standards that you set for yourself. Adbhutam asti etadrisha swabhavah etasyaha bhashayaha. Agre pashyamah divadi ganaha chaturtha gana asti, and again we'll introduce you to the conjugation of two verbs. So there is div, which is the original verb of this group, and then vid. So you see div and vid, it's a word play a little bit here, to know. The shine and to know, there are similarities. So if you know, you shine forth. Okay, and vartamana kale asti and bhavishya kale api bhavishyati. Tari divadi atra div dhatu parasmaipadi rupe kim bhavati iti pashyama. Pashyantu atra. Okay, tari etat kinchit dirgham asti, prayatnam karomi. Tari divu krida vijigisha vyavahara dyuti, and dyuti is the sense of shining. You see, krida was the sense of to sport, but it has all these senses, and we've just given you in English two of them. So when you say div, it can mean so many things. Tari dyuti, stuti, moda, mada, swapna, kanti, gatishu. Okay, all of that comes from div. It would be fascinating to try and find the subtle connections underlying all of them. There must be some commonality. But I can even open that up for you as an assignment. And forum madhye vadantu, that what do you see is common underlying all these words? Is there something that is common? Astu atra vikarana pratyaya ka asti shyanniti. Tari divu pashyantu tatra, and it becomes div finally. And atra div plus shyan plus tip kim karoti, it makes that shyan ultimately with lashakwatadhite, that shyan, the sh is made an it there, and the tasya lopaha means it disappears, and it becomes div plus yan plus tip, and then the nakara also drops off with the halantyam and tasya lopaha, and then moving on you've got div plus ya plus ti becomes divyati. Astu abhyasam kurma militva divyati divyataha divyanti divyasi divyathaha divyatha divyami divyavaha divyamaha. Bhavishyakali kurma devishyati. So you see, there is a guna of the ikara into ekara. Devishyati, devishyataha, devishyanti, devishyasi, devishyathaha, devishyatha, devishyami, devishyavaha, and devishyamaha. Any words that come to your mind when you think of div and deva format of it? Uttamam. The word deva or devata come from the root div, which means to shine, which is also similar to the English root div or divine. Okay, so the devata is not just this being. The devata is the representation of the shining beings, the forces of light in the universe. And then Tatra Purna Vaidika Katha asti, why are these the forces of light? Because they help to enlighten us further. those forces that are working at a psychological dimension help to grow the light within us. In a game of light and darkness, which is the game of evolution itself, the Mahalila, the objective there is to grow the light within, and the Devatas are those forces that are helping us bring this light without. Astu? And the Dasyus, the terrors, the dividers, they are those who prevent it. They keep the world of darkness. So if one wants to bring the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven on earth, as the Christian religions or the Christian culture also talks about, and all world cultures that have sought enlightenment refer to this need to grow the light within. Astu tari बहु interesting asti tatra. So Divadi Ganaha tatra kim kim asti nrit nrityati to dance, nartishyati, sham shamyati to quieten down, and then shamishyati, which is the word that we're all very familiar from here, from sham dhatu, shantihi uttamam, muh muhyati, mohishyati. Astu. So all these words are some things that you might already be familiar with, I'm sure. So mohaha. So when you're over obsessed, when you're in delusion with something, that is the word mohaha here. So very often in the Upanishads you come across dhiras tatra na muhyati, the Gita Upanishad, you find this. So the wise are never deluded by apparent realities or attachments or attractions. Iti. तर्हि दिवादिगणस्य द्वितीय धातु अत्र अस्ति विद् धातु and अत्र आत्मनेपद्यां भविष्यति. You see how समानः अस्ति तत्र रूप. Only thing you have here you get the tita atmanepadanam tere. Okay, so you come to that point and suddenly you see that it becomes the sarvadhatukam apit iti. So it becomes vidyate, to be iti. So it says vidum sattayam, to be. A quick practice of that: vidyate, vidyete, vidyante, vidyase, vidyethe, vidyadhve, vidye, vidyavahe, vidyamahe. So in our conversations you will encounter this usage quite a lot. And then you've got ekavachane, dvivachanam and bahuvachanam. Vetsyate, vetsyete, vetsyante in the bhavishyakala, vetsyase, vetsyethe, vetsyadhve, vetsye, vetsyavahe and vetsyamahe. Astu. And atra you've just got a few more verbs that have been added. So you've got jan, jayate and janishyate, man, manyate, mansyate, liyate, leshyate or lasyate. Okay, liyate means, which means to completely become one with. Okay, manyate from mana, manushya, all of them to think. So the thinking part of the individual. Jan, to be born. Janma dinam comes from there. Some verbs here, say it along with me quickly. So div, divyati, nrit, nrityati, vyad, vidyati, to pierce, sham, shamyati, hrish, hrishyati, bhram, bhramyati, vid, vidyate, jan, jayate, man, manyate, yud, yudhyate. Astu, spashtamasti, agre gacchamaha. Swadiganasya dhatuhu asti su or shru api. So there is something here, we'll talk about it. And in the parasmaipadi tasya kim bhavati rupam vartamana kale bhavishya kale cha. So we've got shui abhishave. Okay, so shui is in abhishave, and abhishava means, as you can see here, it means to press out. Alright, so you've got shui abhishave and it becomes the pratyaya, vikarana pratyaya is shnu. What does that do? You have here a swadibhya shnu, and you go down and you say that here again that same lashakvat tadhite. So you'll start becoming familiar. So the sh has to drop off with that, and then with the lopaha is what makes it drop off, and then you've got nu, so su nu, and then you've got the sound that with this ginti, niti. Okay, it's quite a complicated one to even pronounce, and that becomes sunoti iti. With these rules you end up with the form which is the final one, sunoti. And then ekasartham militva kurma, sunoti, sunutaha, sunvanti, sunvanti, sunoshi, sunuthaha, sunutha, sunomi, sunuvaha and sunvaha. Alternatively, sunnumaha or sunmaha. Astu. Bhavishyakale kim bhavati? Soshyati, soshyataha, soshyanti. You have to be very careful that because you're saying sa and sha, it doesn't become a soshyati. That means a very different thing. Sa, o. So, soshyati. Soshyatah, Soshyanti, Soshyasi, Soshyatah, Soshyatha, Soshyami, Soshyavah and Soshyamaha. Soshyavah and Soshyamaha. Astu? Agre gacchamaha. So what are the other words of this? You've got Su, Sunoti, Soshyati, Ap, Apnoti to get, and Apsyati will get. Shak, to be able to, Shaknoti, Shakshat, Chi, Chinoti, Cheshyati, iti bhavati. Alright? Agre gacchama. Now, Savadhanam, because the word Shru, which means to hear, is from the Swadi Gana and it's a Panchama Gana group. But when you're looking for it, you will also see that it is often given as a Bhuadi Gana from the first group. Astu? Let's try and understand this also a little better possibly. So, we see that in Shrunoti, you've got Shrunoti, Shrunutaha, Shrunvanti, Shrunoshi, Shrunuthaha, Shrunutha, Shrunomi, Shrunuvaha and Shrunvaha, Shrunumaha and Shrunmaha. Shroshati, Shroshyataha, Shrosyanti, Shrosyasi, Shrosyathaha, Shrosyatha, Shroshyami, Shrosyavaha, Shrosyamaha. So, if you say for example, I will listen to music tonight, how would you say that? I will listen, so Shroshyami, to music, Sangeetam, tonight. Adya, Ratri, at night becomes Ratrau. Tari Adya Ratrau, Sangeetam, Shroshyami. Okay? You can say Aham also if you want to add. How would you do that in the Vartamana Kala? So, I am listening to music tonight. How would you say that? Aham Adya Ratrau, Sangeetam, Shrunomi. What if you make that into a plural, it will be Vayam Adya Ratrau, Sangeetam, Shrunumaha. So, Shrunumaha or Shrunamaha. And if you want to say it in the Bhavishya Kala, the same sentence, Vayam Adya Ratrau, Sangeetam, Shroshyamaha. Astu, Uttamam. Let's move on. Atra, we've got these dhatus. So, we've got Ap, Apnoti, Ash, Ashnute, Shru, Shrunoti, Dhinva, Dhinoti, Shak, Shaknoti, Du, Dunoti, Chi, Chinoti, Chinute, Dhu, Dhunoti, Dhunute, Vr, Vrinoti, Vrinute, and Su, Sunoti or Sunute. You see, it also has the sense of beds that is there. So, many meanings for a particular verb itself. Tari militva sambhashanam kurma piyushena saha, and bhavanta api atra prayatnam kurvantu karanam atra guessing game asti kinchit. Astu tari idanim sambhashanam bhavishyati, kintu asmin sambhashane bahavaha sandhi niyamaha api santi, vichhedaha santi, punaha sandhi kritaha api vartante. Tari kripaya bhavanta तेषाम अपि अभ्यासं कर्तुं शक्नुवन्ति इति एका संभावना अस्ति. अस्तु, इदानीं प्रथमं सम्भाषणं कुर्मः. नमस्ते पीयूषा, तव शोधकार्यं रिसर्च कार्यं सम्यक् चलति इत्याशां करोमि.
आम् आर्ये, NPTELस्य वर्गकरणेन तत्रापि लाभो भवति.
उत्तमम्. अद्य तु वर्गे धातूनां दशगणानां परिचयः पाठश्च अभवत्. ततः मम मनस्येकं विचार आगतो यत् एकं धातु क्विज़म् अथवा धातु परिचय क्रीडां कर्तुं शक्नुमः. अहं त्वाम् एकैकं धातुं कथयिष्यामि, त्वं च तस्य गणस्य नाम, संख्यां, विकरणप्रत्ययं च अथवा प्रत्ययं च कथयिष्यसि. अस्तु?
अस्तु आर्ये, सिद्धोऽस्मि. पृच्छतु कृपया.
सहजेन प्रश्नेन आरम्भं करोमि. अस् इति धातुः कुत्र विद्यते?
तत्तु अति सहजमस्ति आर्ये. सः तु अदादि इति द्वितीयगणस्य धातुः यत्र विकरणप्रत्ययः नास्ति.
साधु साधु. शृणोति धातुः कस्मिन् गणे अस्ति इति कथय.
तत्तु अति रुचिरमस्ति. सः प्रायशः स्वादिगणे भवति, किन्तु तस्य भ्वादिगणे अपि अन्तर्भावः अस्ति. अस्मिन् विषये अनेकमतानि सन्ति. केचन वैयाकरणाः वदन्ति एषः भ्वादिगणीयः, केचित् वदन्ति एषः स्वादिगणीयः. परन्तु अहं शब्दकल्पद्रुमः वाचस्पत्यं इति विधानग्रन्थे दृष्टवान् यत् श्रुधातुः भ्वादिगणीयः तथा स्वादिगणीयः उभयत्र परिगणितः। अभिधानद्वयं वदति भ्वादिगणे अस्य रूपं भवति श्रवति, स्वादिगणे अस्य रूपं भवति शृणोति इति। पुनश्च श्रुधातुः श्रुत्यर्थे स्वादिगणे भवति तदा तत्र शृणु इति विकरणप्रत्ययः युज्यते। भ्वादिगणे तस्य गत्यर्थे अधिकः प्रयोगः अस्ति। अस्मिन् सन्दर्भे प्रायः तत्र शप् इति विकरणप्रत्ययः भवति।
उत्तमम्। अहं चिन्तयामि तत्र एकः लघु ई दीर्घं जातमस्ति, परिगणितः इति भवति, न तु दीर्घं।
धन्यवादः। आम्,
उत्तमं, सुस्पष्टं बोधितं त्वया, धन्यवादः।
अस्तु आर्ये, अनुगृहीतः अस्मि। शुभं भवतु, प्रणामः।
Shubham te. Moving on to our part on the values and looking at the general definition of dharma. Militva gayama tatra kshama satyam damah shaucham danamindriya sanyamaha ahimsa guru shushrusha tirthanusaranam daya arjavam lobha shunyatvam deva brahmana pujanam anabhyasuya cha tatha dharma samanya uchyate इति विष्णुपुराणे अस्ति एतत् वाचस्पत्ये च मिलति। अस्मिन् वारे वयं गुरुशब्दस्य अथवा गुरुशुश्रूषा इति पदस्य विवेचनं करिष्यामः। So let's try and understand what Guru Shushrusa means. As you can see, it is a compound word. It's made of Guru plus Shushrusa. What's the etymological meaning of Guru Shushrusa? Gurunam Shushrusa Guru Shushrusa iti Shashti Tatpurusha Samasah Asti. Okay, so this implies the service of the Guru is Guru Shushrusa. What's the etymological meaning of Guruhu? Grinati, which means Upadishati or advises, Vedadi Shastrani Indradi Devebhyaha iti Guruhu. Giryate Stuyate Deva Gandharva Manushyadibhihi iti Guruhu. The one who instructs about the Vedas for invoking Indra and other godheads is a Guru, and one who is praised by the Devas, Gandharvas and humans is a Guru. What's the etymology of Shushrusha? Shrotum Ichha, Shru plus San or the Sanantaha Pratyayaha plus the R to make it feminine makes it Shushrusha. And what does it mean? The Sanantaha is a kind of a suffix that is added when you want to say wanting to do something. So in the English grammatical context, it means this is the desiderative form of the verb wanting to listen, to serve by application or implication, which is seva or upasana. Shrotum ichha. What does that really mean? Atra eka shloka asti in Kamandikiyaha. It says Shushrusha Shravanam chaiva grahanam dharanam tatha uho pohortha vijnanam tattva jnanam cha dhigunaha. Okay, so what is this capacity of Shushrusha? The desire to listen. Where all does it have its application? Shushrusha implies those cognitive abilities, the dhigunaha, that involve listening, shravanam, grasping, grahanam, dharanam tatha, so the ability to retain, and uho puhortha vijnanam. So this is the knowledge to engage in debate. So uho puho is this ability to engage in good intellectual debate and discussion. On what? Tattva jnanancha. So it is to do with fundamental. Tattva means the fundamental or essential knowledge systems. And this, because in today's world there's a lot of talk of this first principles thinking, that people were looking for essentials, come down to the basic details and then from there build. We've discussed it earlier on also. So this Tattva Jnanam is one of those practices of arriving at the essence of any field of knowledge. So it could be almost regarded as the Sanskrit translation of first principle thinking, in fact. Chintayitum shakyate. What is the importance of Guru Seva? Atra vadanti dharmarthau yatra na syatam shushrusha vapi tadvidha Tatra vidyana vaptavya shubham bijam ivoshare. Kim vadati atra? Where there is no dharma and artha or any wish to listen and serve, there one should not sow the seed of knowledge, which is vidyana vaptavya. Okay? Shubham vidyana vaptavya. Why? It is bijam ivoshare. So what is it like? It is like sowing the seed in a barren land. Okay? So that is why one needs a certain psychological molding in order to hold, in order to make good use of knowledge, full use of knowledge. Moving on to the next verse, which is Vedabhyasas tapo jnanam indriyanancha sanyamaha ahimsa guru sevacha nishreyasakaram param. Manusmrita Vasi. Both the verses are from Manusmriti. So what is he saying? That the highest way to attain liberation, nishreyasakaram param, for an individual, are the study of the Vedas, Vedabhyasas, and then engaging in austerities, tapaha, jnanam indriyanancha sanyamaha. So seeking knowledge, jnanam, indriyanancha sanyamaha, controlling of senses, ahimsa, that is not practicing non-violence, and guru seva, serving one's guru. All these factors lead to the inculcation of individual liberation. Astu? So let's move on. To conclude, this is a quote by Swami Vivekananda, who is an exemplar of Guru Seva in his lifetime, the way he served his master Sri Ramakrishna with absolute devotion. So he says, when that divinely appointed teacher comes, serve him with childlike confidence and simplicity. Freely open your heart to his influence and see in him God manifested. Those who come to seek truth with such a spirit of love and veneration, to them the Lord of Truth reveals the most wonderful things regarding truth, goodness, and beauty. You have the list of references here. So, etasya sarvasya abhyasam kurvantu. Adya gananam parichaya abhavat. It's a good idea to try and learn that verse on the different groups. Tad jananti chet agre gatvapi labhaya eva bhavati. Astu tat patitum prayatnam kurvantu, and vikarna pratyasya smaranam asti nasti mahan bhedah na bhavati, kintu adhika tatra abhyasam kurvantu. Dhatavah tatra bahavah santi, ekam ganam nitva abhyasam kurvantu. Then the body will remember the logic of the verb conjugations. So try to aim for that, because then sambhashane tasya upayogah bhavishati. Ityuktva atra viramami. Namaste.